Hello and welcome to BioFutures. Hello, Hannah.
Hello.
How are you?
I'm okay. Sorry, a bit of a technical issue there.
Don't worry, we always have a few glitches. Now, I'm going to warn everybody in advance. I've now returned to the continent and it's probably about 33 right now. And so if the camera starts to go dodgy or the sound starts to go dodgy, it means that basically the battery on the camera is overheating. But I'm going to try and avoid that. So hopefully we won't have any technical glitches. So where are you joining us today from, Hannah?
I'm in my office at work, so yeah, I've been involved knee deep in assessment today. So
Isn't it?
it's that time of year.
And is it going well?
Yeah, it's going okay. It's just a lot to do.
It is. All academics panic at this time of year. That's why I'm glad I'm not a full-time academic.
It's actually really quiet everywhere else, so I picked the perfect place to stay. So
Excellent. Well, for those that don't know Hannah, I'm going to invite you to do a bit of an intro on your background. But today we're going to be talking about a number of issues. We're going to talk a bit about biomaterials and biodesign, but also, although we have touched on the ethics and social implications of these emerging fields, this is one of Hannah's main research strands. So we're going to be digging into that in much more detail, giving Hannah a chance to really illuminate some of the things that need to be on our radar, that we need to consider, her hopes, her concerns, etc., because we couldn't find anybody who was better versed in the subject. But Hannah, I thought we'd kick off. How did you get involved with the biofields?
So I actually went back to study an MA in sustainable design in it was around 2016. I did it part-time for 2 years alongside working full-time, which was quite crazy, but I managed it. And I really went back to study that because I wanted to re-engage with my textile practice. Prior to that, my work was much more, I did a Masters of Fine Arts at Goldsmiths, and my work was very site specific. It was much more about kind of codes and symbols and communication within kind of interior decoration. So it was still related to textiles, but it's very, very different. And I really wanted to get back to my core interests around textiles. And so I started by looking really broadly at what was going on in the field at the time and where things were. And I started to notice, initially it was the work of Suzanne Lee that really kind of caught my attention with her Bioratorium project. And as soon as I saw that and engaged with it, you know, the concept of being able to produce our clothing in a completely different manner, you know, almost to the point of something that felt sort of quite science fiction, that we might be growing our clothes in the future into preformed pattern pieces, or, you know, even kind of preformed garments. And then it was the fact that I started to understand that, you know, not only the potential in terms of designing and making in different ways was really exciting, but that also it could potentially, you know, reduce a lot of the environmental impacts that the fashion industry was having at the moment. So by condensing the production process, by changing the raw materials that we work with, by changing the feedstocks that we're utilising, you know, even growing and dyeing and maybe even embellishing a garment all in one step, as well as you know, reducing water use, land use, environmental impacts with transporting clothing, transporting cloth to then be made into clothing, to then transport again, to then be sold somewhere else. So it just kind of stopped me in my tracks, really, the possibilities of what sort of quite a dynamic shift could do.
Yeah, and so that's, you know, that's interesting, because for many people they've been drawn to it, very much aware of the sustainable elements, but partly because it is this radical new field of design. It involves a completely new way of working,
Mm.
and that must be extremely prevalent in your mind, because, as you said, you trained in the traditional way. Thinking about the comparison between the training in your masters and what you've learned about design before, what were the most radical uh, shifts, not just in terms of sustainability, but in terms of design as process?
I think there's a few things. There's sort of the aesthetics of the material as a finished material. I mean, I predominantly worked with bacterial cellulose, so you know, the similar process that you use to making kombucha tea, and it's weird. I mean, it's like a squidgy jelly. It's kind of spongy. It's slippery. It stinks of vinegar. It's, you know, kind of everything away from your experience of when you would be going into a haberdashery and, you know, looking at maybe like luxurious silks or you know, sort of quite fine cottons, anything like that. It's a very different experience in terms of handling the materials and the kind of final finish, although it is very similar to leather when it's finally dried. And then the other thing was sort of having to think the design process kind of backwards sometimes. So in one of the pieces that I made, the bio tunic, I made the grow vats in the shape of the pattern pieces, so that there was no waste, so they would grow in shape. And I had to calculate the shrinkage when it dried, and then I had to make the pattern blocks 3-dimensional, so that I could then vacuum form a plastic vat on the, you know, the good old vacuum former that you often use on your foundation, your art foundation in the workshop. And so there was a lot of kind of backwards thinking in that process. And then you've got the whole process where you're collaborating with the organisms, so you're having to feed them and look after them. And, you know, I was a bit of an amateur at that stage, so I didn't really know if I was giving them the right conditions, or, you know, I was just growing it in my spare bedroom on top of the tumble dryer.
Yeah. So many of us have started out that way.
Yeah. And my husband used to come in and it's like, what are you doing?
I'm just glad that they were benign, because
Yeah.
otherwise
Yeah.
the carnage
Yeah.
that could have been created from these home experiments. Oh, that's brilliant. So you started very much hands-on, and it reminds me of the conversation I had with Nancy Dines in series 1, when Nancy was talking about how she started out, the fact that this is so new that many of the figures that are leading this actually were having to sort of create their own labs, in effect, and that is still very much the case today, isn't it? How have you seen the sort of education system? Obviously, you're working with you know, a leading UK creative university. How have you noticed the changes in the processes that are taught in college?
I think here we've definitely become more interested in alternative materials. We're not sort of, you know, we're definitely not at the stage of like CSM in terms of having an integrated grow lab or anything like that. Maybe it will be something that happens in the future. But yeah, I mean, students are very interested in the possibilities of these new materials and new processes for designing and making. But they tend to be quite limited to what can be done in a domestic environment for the moment. You know, I share my research with my students when I have the chance. You know, I bring in the samples, and it's something that they're starting to integrate more on the BA textiles that we've got here as well, within the limitations of what we're able to do. So the other way that I've tried to bring it in is through the methods that I use in my own work as well, which is more speculative design. So, you know, if we're limited to a certain extent of what we can do physically, you know, we can at least be speculating, you know, and using kind of more critical design techniques as well. So we've got a project that does that at the moment in a couple of our courses that really gets them to think about like 50 years in the future.
Yeah, yeah. And I think, I mean, fashion has always been, you know, very good at that. My first biomaterials and biodesign project was back in 1994. And that was this zeitgeist speculative futures where, you know, you could put your futures head on and you could think about, well, what might 10, 20, 30 years of developments in materials and pattern cutting and all these various other areas, you know, manifest in a sense. And that's, I think, one of the things about fashion that's very strong, because although we see a lot of speculation in architecture, because more generally with architecture, for all the speculation, in most people's minds, architecture is here and now. It's solving practical problems, whereas fashion has always had that very strong element of the imagination, of transporting you, of expressing your future hopes in a sense, and of the kind of identity that you want to associate with. One of the things I really like about your work, including the tunic, is that whereas some of the garments that have been created, brilliant though they are technically, they are not, if I'm honest, things that I could see on a catwalk. They're not things I could see in Vogue. They're not things I think that many people would engage with. Your tunic could be in a Chanel collection. It could be on the runway. It looks stunning. In the sort of course of your design, to what extent have you felt that creating garments that are genuinely very wearable and desirable to, as it were, the masses, you know, what's your sense of that? Do you think that biofashion, biomaterials, biodesign could open up, if you like, a sort of bigger spectrum of aesthetic among other possibilities? Or do you think that the very nature of the process of using biomaterials and biodesign is rather limiting in terms of possible aesthetic avenues?
I think it's a bit of a mixture, because I think you've kind of got two ends of the spectrum at the moment, where you've got maybe, you know, people like me and other designers who, if they're working in kind of more domestic environments or sort of small studio setups, you know, there is a limitation as to what you can do, because it has to be a controlled environment. But then if you think about the other end of the scale, you know, you've got a number of biotech startups who have already, you know, are already putting materials and products out into the market, whether they're their own or whether they're collaborating with designers. But that's taken, you know, a number of years of development. So, because one of the biggest challenges with the technology is scalability, and being able to scale, you know, at manageable costs as well. So, I hope, and I mean, I think that, you know, things will develop across the entire fashion market eventually, but it's just going to take time. And I think, you know, one of the most important things in terms of that is that we really need to think about how that happens as well, so that we're not just either using the materials as for drop-in replacements within the existing system, which really needs to be reformed, because otherwise in 20 years' time we could be in exactly the same situation that we are with synthetics now, that they're causing a number of untold issues that we haven't foreseen. And then we've got, you know, a kind of a detriment of new forms of waste that are unmanageable in different ways. So that's really that's a really important element. But yeah, I mean, I think the technology still needs to evolve, really, to kind of to fully be expanded across all different areas of the markets, and therefore be utilised in different ways. There's so much we don't know yet.
Yeah, I mean, it strikes me, when I was thinking about who to invite to this series, there were a couple of biomaterials researchers that I did think about inviting because I really liked their materials. But then when I looked at the way that they were being used, it was very much taking these materials and just sort of dropping them as an augmentation of the existing fashion model, which, as we know, is completely broken. And I felt aesthetically doing that wasn't really sort of pushing the paradigm. And I rather wonder, I mean, I think it would be fair to state that this domain is so exciting from a design perspective. It's not a new school, but it's certainly a school that is very much representative of what is possible at the edge of design. It feels to me that it deserves its own showcase. It deserves its own place where you can have these speculations. You can go to the sort of Alexander McQueen level conceptual show, and you can actually get across the idea that when you embrace this, you're kind of embracing the journey, because, as you say, there are so many unknown questions. We can't answer, everything that is going to emerge. We can only sort of guess. But for many people, that in itself will be exciting, won't it? It's emergent property, that possibility that is what gets their interest.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's, the challenge at the moment as well is I understand why companies are developing drop-in replacements, because, I think in many senses it might be quite hard for people to actually adopt a very, very different aesthetic, much more of a kind of a biological aesthetic. I think, it could potentially be sort of go in the same direction as kind of eco-fashion did originally, with kind of, being a bit frumpy and kind of, like muddy colours and hemp and itchy materials, and not being very attractive. So I understand why drop-in replacements are being created, but I think it's just, there's so much missed opportunity there in terms of not only designing with biology, but actually learning from nature in order to really look at the systems that we're using, not just in terms of production, but economically as well. We need to use nature as an all-round inspiration to look at the way that it often produces only as much of it as it needs of specific materials. It doesn't have waste byproducts in its systems. They're always used for something else. There's always a function for everything. And so I think there's so much potential for learning there that we need to ensure that we don't lose and we don't make the same kind of mistakes with slightly different matter.
Absolutely. And thinking about the issues of ethics, what are your biggest concerns with respect to, if you like, the potential unintended consequences of what is an effective design movement with really great aims that aim to make a better future for people and planet? What are the things that are on your radar as problematic?
Yeah, there's a number of things. I mean, I think if we start to use organisms to make, not only make, but to design materials and garments, potentially condense the production process. So, say a material grew, dyed and embellished a fabric, would there start to be kind of issues around different kind of cultural traditions and kind of specific kind of heritage within certain crafts techniques that would then be lost because of that, because we'd be handing that craftsmanship over to someone else, to an organism. I mean, we're obviously going to be controlling them to a certain extent, but at the same time, would that kind of cause another push for a loss of specific crafts that's already an industry that's often being hammered and struggling.
Yeah.
The other thing is around the element of controlling life. So should we really be doing that? Should we really be controlling living organisms, even if they are nano, micro? Are we just exploiting something at a different scale? That's something that we really need to consider. And then alongside that, depending on the types of organisms that we use, if we're then talking about synthetic biology, where we're designing microbes from scratch, and we're, you know, actually programming them to do what we want them to do, what does that mean in terms of the wider consequences? You know, if we can adapt and alter life, how do we ensure that we keep that within, you know, within the parameters of what seems being okay ethically? And then will that have an impact on other things? If we start to control life, will we start to control the design of ourselves? Will things take that further step? I mean, I know it maybe seems a bit science fiction, but it has to be considered.
I think they're really good points. I mean, I particularly like the first point because it sort of parallels with the discussions around AI. The fact that if you create a system that is capable of doing certain tasks, will it take jobs? I mean, obviously in AI, I think the debate is sort of mature enough now to know that it's not going to replace certain human jobs, because the very obvious thing, it's not human. It doesn't think like a human. It doesn't have the same values, and actually it's a very rudimentary form of processing information. So but I think it's more interesting actually as a proposition for life, because of course life genuinely is intelligent. It does have its own agency. It isn't historically programmed by humans. It evolves its own programming, and so I think that's a great point. I mean, that would be a brilliant sort of panel discussion issue, and I think something that would probably capture a lot of people's imagination. And this sort of, you know, when you're speaking about the idea of the life, you know, the sort of what happens when we start to try and engineer. Of course, if we think to architecture, really all of the experiments where an attempt has been made to try and create a closed loop system in which you are trying to control life has all gone a little bit what we might call Dr. Ian Malcolm in Jurassic Park. Life finds a way. And I'm thinking to the Biosphere 2 project, where they had all these grand plans for the project, and actually many people that don't really know the project very well imagine it's this sort of, you know, emblematic of how wonderful a sort of closed architectural environment can be in terms of containing various different systems of life. But the reality is ants penetrated that environment, started to cause havoc, and again life found a way, because how do you keep that tiny organisms? So we don't really, and if we're thinking to other domains, and also actually with agriculture, if we think about the idea that we can use certain organisms to prevent against, and to control the pests in agricultural crops. Again, those experiments have gone wrong. You know, we've got the ladybird, the Asian ladybird, that was associated in a contained environment that escaped and is now native to Britain, etc. So life does find a way. So I think that's a very interesting point. And again, it's really deserving of a lot of discussion, because it's so easy to just assume, oh, well, it looks inert, it looks harmless enough, but what happens if it evolves, if there's something within the sort of the genetics, or the sort of the programming of it, that is going to bring up these, as you say, science fiction scenario.
Yeah. I mean, generally, like, mostly everything in terms of, you know, any use of a synthetic cell, it should all be within a controlled lab, and they would literally just be producing the materials. But there is always obviously the possibility that something like that could escape. you know, could be leaked in some way. It was interesting because I was listening to Radio 4 on the way to work this morning, and they were talking about, you know, the current ongoing debate about the origination of COVID, of coronavirus, which is still being looked into at the moment as to whether that was from a lab or whether it was from an animal source. So yeah, it was very apt that that was on the radio this morning.
And I mean, actually, COVID is, I think, quite a good analogy more generally, because, of course, the reason why COVID spread so quickly, it was, in effect, whatever the source, it was the way in which human societies are organised. It was the fact they're so very connected. In effect, there was so poor sort of, although there was monitoring of viruses, there was, in effect, so little sort of insurance against the spread of pathogens, and that there were very simple measures that could have been taken in order to prevent against the global spread of a pathogen that were not there, despite the repeated warnings from the early 2000s, a pandemic is coming. So exactly, you know, I think with this, I mean, just sort of throwing something into the sort of the air, you know, although obviously biomaterials are in effect like wood. I mean, they are, by the time you're wearing, let's say, a Susan Lee jacket, those sort of organisms are, I'm assuming they're more or less dead, but nonetheless it's a living material. So the question would be, just like wood, obviously, even when timber has been felled, the tree is dead. It's not really dead because it's housing all these microorganisms, isn't it? It's basically an ecosystem. It's just the tree itself had died. So I'm sort of picturing this sci-fi now, where we've got these biomaterials that become the home, the sort of the incubation lab for pathogens. I mean, that is, you know, I know as well at the leading edge of virus, they've now realized that, or in fact, this is relevant to COVID. They've realized that COVID and certain viruses effectively hide in fat cells, and they lay dormant. So it's all getting very Prometheus here, because you know, there are certain materials that are, as it were, more hospitable to life forms than say most petrochemical based materials. So yes, I think it's really important. How do you feel about the number of sort of platforms to facilitate these big questions? Are you finding that there are enough in the way of research grants and other opportunities to have these discussions, or do you feel there needs to be more?
Not sure. I mean, I must admit, I sort of try and keep abreast of what's going on, but I think the thing that I'm finding, I mean, I don't know if this is 100% accurate or not. Maybe it's me not looking into things sort of clearly enough. But I feel like there's quite a separation between sort of opportunities in synthetic biology or within the sciences, and then on the other side, there's kind of opportunities kind of more within design research. There aren't as many opportunities where those two things come together in terms of funding, but maybe I'm missing those funding streams. I don't know. Tell me if I am.
Well, all
I'd like to know.
I've ranted about it before, and I doubt this will again. When we look at where funding is going from VC, venture capital, and if you like from the private sector, there is a massive bias to what we might call back of the beer mat concepts. So ideas that are effectively applied, their applications of pre-existing technology constructs.
Yeah.
And now they might be very weak. They might be very weak indeed. And they tend to sort of follow trends and memes. And they basically propagate because there's so low awareness of the sort of the technical side of things like AI. I mean, we saw it. AI has been obviously around for a long time. It's been in use and in very sophisticated ways in the space industry, in the military, etc. And then ChatGPT comes out. Oh my God, VCs are just can't, you know, they can't rush to throw money at these chatbots quick enough. And you think, well, hang on a minute. Actually, as AI applications go, that's comparatively unsophisticated compared to some of the other things. But it's because there's hype. It's because of all this, oh my goodness, you know, you've got to be on the bandwagon. And we haven't yet seen that in some areas of biotech. We've seen some applications definitely get the gravitas, but I say more generally, we haven't. And I think another thing, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. Obviously, the bio fields are very heavily populated by female leaders. It's no, I mean, I have not, as it were, tried to engineer the number of female figures that we've had in this series or the last series. It is very simply the case that many of the most seminal thinkers are women, which isn't to say there aren't some pioneering men in the field as well. There are lots of them, but there are many, many women. And I wonder how the gender bias in funding and investment and in academia as well, because of course those stats are nothing to be proud of if we look at the sort of the disparity between investment into female-led projects, female-led research, and male. What are your thoughts on that? Have you witnessed gender inequality in funding, or have you got ideas on this more generally?
I mean, not personally. Most of the things that I've applied for, have kind of been more through work, some support through work. But in terms of quite specific research outputs, I haven't been making any particular kind of external grants or award applications, so I haven't really had the experience within that area. Don't really have so much experience, but yeah, I mean, I probably need to talk to my sister about it. She probably experienced it more, being a woman in the field of systems engineering. I know she has experienced a hell of a lot of bias as a female, and it's taken her a lot, to get where she is today. So I don't know. I feel like I'd be speculating, really.
Yeah, you're not sort of.
I don't have first-hand experience.
Yeah,
but I wouldn't be surprised if there is a bias.
Yeah, I think it'll be really interesting to see how it plays out, just because the proportion of women in this sector and at the forefront is so high, and yet we are starting to see some quite big money come into the biotech field. I mean, when Biomason did their funding rounds, they managed to get a lot of money. I mean, obviously that's partly because they've got military applications for their tech, but I mean, equally, you could argue for this, if you were sort of thinking ahead, there could easily be military applications for biomaterials, plenty of them, particularly when it comes to sort of wound healing and protection against, let's say, bioterrorist threats. So I think it'll be very interesting. I think it's one to watch. And I might sound cynical, but when the stats are so bad, I don't think we've got any choice but to sort of, be alert to that. When you think about flipping to the other side of this, the opportunities that this is opening up, what really excites you? What makes you feel that this really is one of the most pioneering places to be right now in terms of research?
I think it's a combination of seeing specific materials coming out on the market, at the ability to start to be mass produced, as well as kind of more niche materials from specific startups, especially in America. Well, not just America, but also Japan. So, people like Spiber and Modern Meadow and Bulk Threads. Seeing the kind of where they've actually got to since I started with the research in 2016. But then at the same time, seeing sort of some of the smaller companies who are really starting to take off. So, although I think they're growing quite exponentially at the moment, like Modern Synthesis, and I know Cassie Quinn, she's just set up her own studio as well, developing the biosequence that she's working on. So I think probably really those smaller studios are the things that excite me more, because I think there's more potential for not flexibility, but for different things to be happening in that space, for potentially not developing so automated systems like the larger biotech companies will be doing, and actually learning through making and seeing what the organisms can do, the different kind of things that they can do, and the unexpected moments that you get in the process of designing and making, you know, with the materials that we currently work with as a design process. So I think that's one of the things that excites me the most, the kind of tools that are going to develop and the way that the studios are going to kind of expand and evolve, and the, you know, the kind of the design services that they might be offering, and then ideally how that could potentially offer different kinds of retail experience as well, at a smaller scale. So it's really interesting with the talk that you had last week. Was it Pablo?
Piero,
That's it.
Angelo.
Sorry. Yeah, when he was talking about biocouture, but also kind of the idea of bio-bespoke. So, you know, really growing and designing one-off pieces for clients, that kind of customization, that level of customization that you might be able to take into a new kind of direction, really, and how you might have quite a different relationship with your customer base as well, in that sense that you won't just be sending the garments or the objects off with them and just leaving customers to it. They might be coming backwards and forwards and you know, kind of growing new parts or repairing elements of them. And then I think the other thing, which is something that I keep really wanting to explore through a new piece of work, I'm hoping that I'll get there this year, is how it might change the way that we care for clothes as well at home. So what our home environment kind of might look like in terms of our wardrobes and our washing machines, how they might evolve over time. So, you know, whether as biomaterials develop, whether we might, at the end of the day, take a garment off and, you know, maybe we would spray it with a particular solution that would help to, you know, mend and fix areas of it. We might have to kind of seal it away in a contained environment to kind of, you know, keep all of the organisms safe and kind of contained. And whether we might sort of move to a completely different way of kind of washing and aftercare of our clothes as well, that would have less environmental impact.
I love that idea. As you were saying that, I was visualizing a sort of a wardrobe of the future that's more like a micro lab. It's a micro, in you pop your clothes, and there's all sorts of properties in that lab that, as you say, help to cleanse, to repair, to make your biomaterial clothes actually not just last longer, but I mean, I'm thinking possibly here even change their properties. Who was it? Let's see, of the conversations we were having. Oh goodness, I'm gonna have to go back over it. Oh, that was it. It was Susanna Radneva. We were talking about the sort of outer possibilities of what clothes might be able to do by biomaterials, and we were talking about the idea of you know, back in ye olde days, by which I'm going back centuries, people obviously had far fewer clothes. Particularly the sort of the less privileged would usually have a day-to-day outfit, one outfit, and best outfit. And even those people that were wealthy, obviously they only had a very limited number of clothes. And we were sort of discussing that idea through the lens of what we might think at the leading edge. And I was thinking to a science fiction short that I wrote, in which the clothes that people wear were like octopus skin, and it allowed them to sort of, in the style of Predator, the sci-fi movie, to blend and to become camouflaged, or to send out signals like octopus and squid and so forth do. And I'm thinking with your wardrobe here, or this lab of putting it in there, and it somehow changes the properties. And although that might sound sci-fi, you might have seen in the last collections that were showed, I can't remember if it was in Paris, I think it was Paris, it might have been New York, there was actually a collection that was, during the show, they subjected it to light, to UV light, and all of the textile patterns changed. They were catalyzing a reaction in the material, and so a whole new pattern emerged. And I love that idea of these new materials that you can just subject them to a catalyst. It might be exposure to a chemical, a pheromone, whatever it is, and wow, it just looks different, or it feels different, or there's this property. I wonder, 50 years from now, is that possible? Is that possible?
Yeah, I think it would be really exciting in terms of, you know, there's so many applications for that in terms of like sportswear and different elements of performance of materials, or, you know, just in terms of identity, just communicating ourselves in different ways through making a, you know, an interchangeable interface, but one that is biological.
And again, I mean, the concept isn't new, because there have been a number of designers, haven't there, that have explored the idea of communicating through your garments changing colour, or through some other process going on. So this is literally, but of course, biological organisms, as we've seen, they're amazing at changing their properties, aren't they? Chameleons, etc. So yeah, that's sort of exciting. When you think to I know many of the labs and sort of the courses and the kind of work they've got going on. I don't know what's going on at your university. Thinking to your students' work, what's some of the stuff that has really excited you that you can talk about? Because obviously you can't talk about all of it, but of the stuff you can talk about, what's really got you excited?
I think recently. Long pause. That's terrible, isn't it? Sorry, students.
You've got a lot of work, got a lot of projects to think through. It's like a Rolodex going around in your head.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, I must admit, this year students haven't really taken on the sort of so much of the future scoping. You know, that's one thing that just happens. You know, we teach a lot around sustainability on our courses. We have one project around future scoping, around digital futures. But yeah, I mean, it's always something that I've integrated into the curriculum, but even more so this year. So yeah, I mean, I think a lot of them have focused much more on their own personal culture this year, in terms of their final major projects that they've just done. It's been quite diverse what they've been doing. Some of it's just kind of been completely the opposite and nothing to do with any of these topics, and just being quite playful and fun. But I think, you know, all of those things are still really important in this context, you know, as alongside fashion developing down this route in terms of the use of biomaterials and biofabrication and becoming more sustainable and circular and diverse. You know, I think it's really important that fashion can still be fun alongside that, and can still be playful, and that it can still be, you know, referencing different cultures, diversity, and really focused on communication as well. So I think that they're some of the things that have been the most exciting about the work that the students have been doing. It's always when it's the personal projects that they feel really connected to. So yeah, I have to try not to force my opinions and my interests on them too much.
It's great to hear a very strong interest in identity, because of course at the moment we have been living in this age when there has been so much pressure on young people to embrace homogeneous ideas, to become that sort of filtered Instagram avatar that looks a very particular way, and you know, that is embracing very particular values, extrovert, you know, constantly sort of sharing lifestyle updates and all the rest of it. And so, you know, it's interesting you say that, and that actually again connects to Susanna Radneva's work, because she's looking at how you basically splice the ancient traditions of her culture, which is from the steppes of Siberia, to, you know, in with the leading edge of biomaterials and of science and so forth. And so this re-engineering of the past identity, but in a way that makes it very much relevant and up to date to the present. So that feels like a really positive move, because it's young people taking ownership of their identity and rejecting that homogeneity, which ultimately is what fashion is all about, isn't it? It's about, you know, knowing what you've got to say to the world.
Yeah, definitely. And it's that's one of the things that we really try and focus on, is for them to have their own individual voices, as well as being very research driven as well. We really try and train the students in the importance of grounding their ideas within primary, secondary research, but from diverse fields as well. So just because they're studying fashion doesn't mean to say they might not be looking into a sculptor, or they might be, you know, looking into something in the social sciences. So we make sure that they try and look at the interconnections of their topics holistically, and then start that as a really kind of foundation for all of their projects.
And that's so important about art school. I mean, I think it is an absolute tragedy that we've had a now succession of governments in the UK that have shown that they really don't appreciate the arts, and they don't understand why they catalyse not just the particular sectors in and of themselves, but they catalyse creativity more generally. Because when you look to the most iconic creative figures to come out of the UK, a disproportionately high number of them went to art school, and they went through this process of learning. Yes, they specialised in a discipline. They had a primary discipline that they were, if you like, trained to be expert in, but they learn, as it were, the tools of the trade that enable you to migrate your knowledge from one medium to another, from one sector to another. And that's obviously why you've got people like David Bowie, brilliant mime artist, brilliant musician, singer-songwriter, actor, among other things. You've got Brian Ferry, calls himself a failed artist because he studied art, just happened to do really well at music. But then when you look at why Roxy Music did well at music, it was because they were bringing to the table more than just great music. They were bringing a dream, a lifestyle, an aspiration. They were constructing that in their whole identity and their album covers. There was an appreciation of the graphic arts. There was an appreciation of photography. And you can see that is very much rooted in the British art school tradition. So, you know, it's really good to hear that that's very much still at the foundation of what you're teaching. Because ultimately, of course, you know, as you say, you don't know where your students are going to end up, do you? You don't know what industry they're going to go to. And you're trying to equip them with that adaptability to shape shift into whatever it is that they want to be and they want to bring to the world.
Yeah, and we're really trying to train our fashion and textile designers, which is one of the pathways that I lead here, in really understanding the challenges and the issues within the industry, so that they can hopefully, be educated to be the ones who go into industry once they're finished, and try and make those changes.
Absolutely. Well, do recommend that I had with my old friend Jane McMillan, the brilliant textile designer and designer, because we had a great chat. It wasn't in this series, it was in the Future Now series. And Jane is doing some brilliant work where she is helping those that are coming out of art school or that are just starting on their career to navigate this space and to actually be their own boss, set up their own labels and get it going. And she is a super individual, just ridiculously full of enthusiasm, frankly. But I've got two more questions for you. They are the standard questions of the series, and so you're aware and the people watching are aware, I'm compiling some zines that are going to extract some of the insights and the ideas from this and converge them with some other insights from the wider community, etc. And one of them is an up-to-date version, a new version of Boyle's list. Now, for those that don't know Robert Boyle, he was a seminal scientist, and he wrote a wish list. He wrote a wish list of all the things he wanted to happen. So in this BioFutures series, I'm asking every single individual, if you can have a wish, just one wish, it's going on the list, it's going on the BioFutures list. We're going to put it out there. What would your wish be, Hannah?
I think it would be for the technology that's being developed and utilised for creating biomaterials, biotextiles, biofashion, to develop to the point where it can become domesticated. So, for example, think of the home computer. So that we can actually get to the point where we would be able to use it in our homes, you know, even if it's just to the point of, you know, kind of like tinkering and playing and experimenting, but ideally to the point where we might be utilising it to make our own clothes, if it could develop to that level. So I'd really like to see the domestication of biotechnology.
I love that. And that will go in the biofashion zine. So if you are able to put a sketch together or a vision, and that might work, possibly your funky lab wardrobe container.
I've got to get on with that work now. It's a good incentive.
And the second question is, by mid-century, by the year 2050, what is your vision for the biofields? What do you see their impact on society and the planet being?
I'd really like to see biomaterials being implemented into the fashion markets at all different kind of scales and points of the segmentation of the market. So, you know, from haute couture to right through to the mass market. But for it to be doing that to a level where it's applicable to those specific markets. So it's thinking about the different speeds and the cycles and the scales of each part of that market. And it's thinking about the life cycle, so the entire value chain of the products, so that we're really shifting away from a linear model to much more of a circular model. And we're really also developing more. We're thinking more about things, not only circularity, but diversity and equity as well, in terms of the systems and the models that we're using. And we're learning from nature, and we're supporting nature. We're working, you know, in harmony with the natural systems of the planet, and ideally moving more towards a point of regeneration rather than destruction and exploitation.
Well, that is a vision I know is shared by a number of other figures in the domain. And one thing I will say is, when I give keynotes to different sectors, regardless of the sectors, they always get a serving of some of the best in biomaterials and biodesign. So I'll pick out a selection of projects, and no matter what sector they're from, no matter whether they are industry, government, whatever, their minds are always blown. They are always excited about it. And so I think if we can get the visibility of the potential of these fields out there, we will get engagement and they will scale. And I'm positive that, all being well, we will by mid-century be able to materialize the vision that you have, and that so far, you know, everyone that has joined us on this series and the last series has spoken to: the systemic approach, working with, not against nature, and embracing what for us are radically different ways of designing from when we started our journeys back in you know, in the 90s or the early 2000s, whenever it was. So thank you for joining me this evening, Hannah. It's been a real pleasure speaking to you.
Thanks for having me. It's been really nice.
Oh, and hearing your views. Now, tomorrow night, we've got 2 sessions this week because last week I was traveling. So tomorrow night, we've got 2 of the co-founders, 2 of the 4 co-founders from Electric Skin are going to be joining us to talk about how biosensing, bioenergy and biomaterials might fuse, among other things, to open up new exciting possibilities. And so I hope you're able to join us. That will be airing an hour later than this session. But all of these sessions, if you've missed any and you want to watch them, currently they're in my Reels archive, but I will be migrating them to YouTube at some future point. So you can see series 1 on there at the moment, not series 2, but I will get them up there if there's any you've missed and you'd like to see. Thank you for joining us, everybody, and thank you again, Hannah. Until tomorrow.